Hey guys, welcome to Windows 11 Paranoid Edition. You know, we haven't done one of these in a while, and I wanted to do another one on a newer updated bootleg. So I figured let's start with Paranoid Edition. Just right off the bat, give you a little history or details on this operating system. Apparently this operating system was built for people that are paranoid about Microsoft spying on you. Built into the operating system, supposedly, the system has all of the privacy settings disabled. The system's also running the light version of Windows 11, meaning that they enabled compression configuration in the operating system. What I can confirm is that this particular OS has no trusted platform module requirements during the installation process. Matter of fact, it also doesn't require you to have an online account, and it doesn't give you the option for an online account, which really makes me wonder if this is an LTSC build. The screen you're seeing currently on your screen is the first screen that I got to see of the operating system. And I haven't even gone into the configuration yet outside of installing VMware tools, so I don't even know what the start menu looks like. Let's dig around this OS a little bit and figure out together what it actually is. I'm going to start obviously with clicking on Start. And it looks like what we're running is Start is Back, which is the older or less commonly known start menu modification software, allowing you to get something similar to like Windows 7 or even Windows 10 in Windows 11. It's interesting because, as we can see here, it does look a lot like our Windows 10 configuration. However, this system is supposed to be Windows 11, and I believe it's because Start is Back is installed on this particular system. We'll have to take a look in the control panel and see if that's the case. Let's right-click on Start and see what happens. All right, so we do have a submenu configuration in the right-click menu, which is nice because that's something that I look for as a systems engineer. I constantly go into the right-click menu to click on things like System and other configurations. Rarely do I go through the regular Start menu to do anything in Windows because I'm not a desktop user for the Windows operating system. I work on the server side, I do the configurations, I do the modifications, I secure the operating systems, but I'm not an end user for a Windows desktop. That's not really who I am from an engineering perspective. From an engineering perspective, my desktop is Linux. I run the server stuff virtualized on top of it for things that I need with Windows-based tools. And then when I need to get into the operating systems themselves, generally speaking, I have tools in both Linux and the Windows world at this point that I use for various things in the operating systems. For instance, if I'm doing any kind of ransomware stuff, the last thing I'm going to do is connect a Windows system to their infrastructure to test those systems. I would use Linux. At any rate, it's nice to see that the right-click menu still exists. Let's go into the system first, and let's take a look to see what we got going on here. So we're on a Windows 11 22H2 build, so it's relatively old. We're talking 3 years old. We could see the manufacturer was I'm going to go with Xristo. Not really sure. Call TeamOS 24/7, whatever it is. There's an online support thing here. I'm not going to click on it because, first of all, I'm not online. And second of all, you know what? Because I'm not online, why not? Let's click on that and see where it actually goes. Or if it even does anything. Because I don't know that Microsoft Edge is installed on here. And I don't see any browsers on it. So I'm guessing that we would have to install a browser on it because I don't have any way to get online to even click on the online support. And as we can see, it does nothing. Nothing pops up. Let's continue on here. We'll continue to go back into Start. Let's go back into the right-click menu. Let's go into Settings. I'm really curious about this because if this is a Paranoid edition or a privacy-related edition, then technically speaking, if I click on Privacy and Security here and we go into the subdirectories, everything should be turned off. But because we now know that there is a bug in the operating system that it's existed since 21H2, I'm wondering if the builders that built this actual version of the OS knew that that existed, and if they did or did not modify the registry keys in association. So let's start with going through the GUI and clicking on Privacy and Security. Let's go to something like Camera or Location. So Location set to off. We can see that these settings are managed by your organization. That's a good sign for setting things off or not turned on. Things are turned off. All right, so cool. We have it set the right way for privacy in the GUI. Let's take a look at the registry and see if this mimics the configuration or if they didn't know. Me personally, I have a feeling they had no idea, but I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to right-click, choose Run. We're going to do regedit, hit Enter, and we'll see if we go to HKey Current User, Software, Microsoft, Windows, Current Version, Capability Access Manager. It's a bit of a tongue twister, right? consent store, and then webcam, which is specifically the key that is associated to camera. And in here, we could see that we do have deny as the current value for the webcam access. However, the subcategories are set still to allow and prompt, meaning that they did understand that they had to make the modification on the current configuration to circumvent the bug in the operating system, but they didn't drill down into the apps themselves to set the permissions, meaning that even though this sets off and all the camera configuration is off, they didn't do the same for the subcategories. So the Windows Store still has full access to the camera, even though the camera is set off on the Windows Store, meaning they used this slide, they didn't use the sub slides to shut the thing off. So unfortunately, while they did do some of the things for privacy, there's no real privacy gain in this operating system versus the operating system you would get off the shelf from Windows, just because of a lack of understanding of the bug that exists in the operating system. If we drill down into a different location, so under microphone, we can see that it is set to deny. And if we go back in here into the settings configuration and look for microphone, which we could see right here, we can see it's all set to off, including the store. Unfortunately, the store is still set to allow, meaning that they just hit the slider and they didn't do the sub configuration. Now, the reason why this is important is because the configuration for the Microsoft Store for the actual microphone means that Microsoft is allowed to record your voice without prompting you, without notifying you, and only God knows what they're using that data for. What will be really interesting is when we go through these configurations a little deeper, I'm curious if they have the automatic approval turned on, because if they do, then even if they set all of this stuff to off, as soon as the system connects to the internet, it would download the updated version, which would replace these older versions, meaning that even if you have it set to off in here, as soon as it downloads the newer version, since it doesn't match the older version, it would automatically replace these locations with the updated software and change the value to allow for every single one of them anyway. Unfortunately, there's no GUI associated with that change or configuration. That is legitimately something you would have to know and be in the registry to know. Let's take a look at those two locations. So the first place we're going to look, which doesn't exist, is HKey current user software Microsoft Windows current version. And then we're going to need to find the store and current identity, which we don't see listed in here as a sub location. Now the problem with that is that that particular location has a key associated to it, and the key value is specifically always prompt before purchase. It's a D word and it should be set to 1. If it's set to 0, which is the default configuration in Windows, it means that Microsoft could automatically install whatever the heck it wants on your system without any kind of consent. When we dig into the Content Delivery Manager location here, we could see that they did take the step to do the pre-installed apps enabled. They set that to 0, meaning that the system won't download automatically pre-installed apps, but they didn't add the key to OEM pre-installed apps. So there should be another key in here somewhere for, or rather not a key, but a regd word, and the regd word should be configured for OEM pre-installed apps enabled. That is how Microsoft is now installing things from like Dell, HP, Lenovo. What they do is they add this key into the registry, and if the system says that it's a Dell, HP, or Lenovo, and you install the operating system, it adds the additional key for the OEM pre-installed apps enabled, which means that's all the bloat and garbage that we used to get on the pre-built OEM system. So if you bought like an HP from Best Buy, for instance, it would have all the Best Buy garbage on it, plus all the OEM HP garbage on it. They don't do that anymore. Now what they do is they have a registry key for the OEM pre-installed apps enabled. And when they add that key into the system, as soon as the system connects to the internet for the first time, it downloads all the bloat onto the system. Now, unfortunately, when you do that and you download all the bloat onto the system, those additional configurations in the actual settings console here for the allow for like access to the things get added to it. And because the bug, even though this says off and these all say off, it doesn't matter. It just turns it on as allow anyway in the registry, and there's no connection to the actual GUI, meaning that even though you think this is all disabled, it's not. And the only way to really disable it is to disable the ability for A, Microsoft to have full approval to install the apps on your machine in the first place, B, to disable the pre-installed apps and the OEM pre-installed apps so that way the system can't download those additional apps on internet connection. That package that I built, that beta package that I built, the GTS 11 package, that has all this stuff predefined on a configuration. So it doesn't allow it to download, it doesn't allow it to update, it doesn't allow it to configure, it doesn't allow the key logging software to be enabled, it doesn't set up the throttling for the different hardware manufacturers, it doesn't turn any of that garbage on, and it removes a substantial portion of the operating system when it comes to this stuff as well. Now I'm working on itemizing that package to clean that up so that way you could pick and choose a la carte what you want to actually run versus what you don't want to run on the actual system. So if you just want to remove one package but keep other stuff, you should be able to do that. But I'm still working on that portion right now. Right now it's kind of an all or one type of scenario. There's 7 options in there, but in order to get the whole thing to really work and function as one package, you got to run all 7 executables. Now with that said, with this configuration, even though they did say, all right, go into the system and say deny, and they did go as far into the configuration as denying it in the registry at the root location, they didn't take the extra step to remove the app-x package configuration and allow, which all right now, as far as I could tell, all still have full access to the system. So there is no really privacy addition on the system. However, that doesn't mean the system's not good. We should take a look at the rest of the configuration and see what else this package comes with in the Paranoid Windows 11 edition. We should also take a look from our Nessus scan and see what a 25H2 system looks like and compare it to these bootleg systems to see if they actually are more secure from an outside visibility versus what the OEM configuration is. Something else not set in here, which once again, probably not all that surprising, because there is no interaction between the GUI and, again, all options inside the registry. And there are a lot of options in the registry that have been added between Windows 10 and 11. And a lot of them are privacy-related concerns that I would have, but most people probably won't care. Tablet tip. There's a configuration in Tablet tip that adds an additional registry key to this location that gives Microsoft the ability to record your fingerprints off the screen. So if you use a touch screen to touch on things, they're recording your fingerprints on the touch screen itself. From what I understand, they're doing this to allow the biometric configuration to set up permissions on later versions of Windows to basically allow you to set file and folder permission based off a fingerprint when you touch a touch screen, giving them the ability to use your biokinetic information to open up a folder based off of permissions on touching the screen. So no more setting up file server or file desktop permissions using your username, but now instead using your fingerprint, which in a business may or may not be something that could be kind of cool in the future. However, you don't really know where they're storing the data, and right now they're using it to collect data and information to see if it's possible. Now the thing is over the past couple months, or even the past year, Azure has had some pretty substantial security-related events, and I don't know how I would feel about storing my biometric data on Microsoft's website. Obviously, this is up to you, but again, if I was going to build an operating system called the Paranoid Edition, and I'm doing air quotes here, I would probably not want that enabled on the configuration. But it doesn't exist here, which means that it's turned on by default if you install the operating system on a touchscreen. And then after this, we won't look at any more registry things. We'll actually just plug through the OS, because at this point I could tell that it's pretty much just got the TPM stripped out of it. But for the most part, everything else that would be a privacy concern is still a concern in the operating system. They changed the GUI, but the GUI doesn't interact with the registry correctly. They didn't add any of the additional registry configurations you would really need to secure the operating system. So it's fair to say that the Paranoid Edition, you're not getting less paranoid by using this edition versus just a regular one. There's no difference in the actual security. The operating system is still just as foobarred as it is whether or not you use the OEM version or this version. It's the same thing, with the exception of maybe the start menu being nicer on this one than on the later version of Windows 11 without the Start is Back software. But if you're really concerned with that, you could just install Start is Back on a regular Windows 11 operating system and get the same effect. I mean, there's really no bonus here from what I can tell of running this versus running just a 25H2 system with Rufus as your ISO configuration to circumvent the TPM module. Here's what we're missing. So underneath HKey local machine, software policies, Microsoft input personalization, we're missing the configuration for the restrict implicit ink collection, and then there's also the restrict implicit text collection. And basically what those two things are they are legal keyloggers built into Windows 11 to allow Microsoft to record every keystroke you do on your Windows 11 system. So without those two added here as additional D-word values, realistically, this operating system still has the OEM keylogger stuff on it as well, meaning that there's really no benefit to running this over an OEM system of any kind. And quite frankly, there might be actually reduced security because since it is a custom OS that is supposedly built around privacy, yet none of the privacy configurations are actually set in the operating system, then you're now running an operating system built by somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, that you're going to install on your side. And that, in my opinion, is a higher risk than just using an OEM-based out-of-the-box configuration of Windows 11, because at least you know Windows 11 is collecting this stuff. I mean, you should know at this point that that's what they do. The problem is with the configuration that we have here in this particular OS, we're missing the configurations that would actually privatize the software and configure, your data on the local system. There's nothing more private about this operating system. So what's been configured is beyond me. We'll jump through this a little bit more. We'll take a look more in the GUI and the configuration, take a look at the add remove, take a look at the listening ports on the configuration. We'll set a static IP address, and we'll run a tenable scan against this system to see if it's at least clean. But it doesn't really give you any benefit running this than just the OEM system itself. Okay, so let's close out of the registry because we've now proven that there's no privacy of any kind as far as configuration. Again, somebody clicked the little box, but that doesn't do anything for us because the backend or the registry configuration is borked. And quite frankly, if you can't control the registry and you don't modify the registry manually, then this doesn't really do anything for you. Let's take a look. We'll go into Windows updates. So we're paused for a week. We don't have, let's take a look at advanced options to see. All right, so we apparently do have configuration for a Windows update, but I don't necessarily know specifically what is configured in the Windows updates. We would have to take a look again at the registry to see what that looks like, but the reality is that I don't see, so policies are set on this device. All right, so let's jump back in the registry real quick and take a look at least at what the update portion of this looks like. So unfortunately, this is still a problem that has existed now since 21H2 and exists in 25H2, and that's that when you make the changes in the GUI for settings for updates or really for privacy and security, any of these things really, anything that's listed in here, for the most part, some of them, like a very small amount, actually function correctly, but the vast majority of them do not. So turning off all of your updates and your configuration for your updates without the policy set configuration existing inside of HKey local machine software policies, Microsoft Windows, and then underneath here, we should have a Windows update, and then underneath that, a UI location or an AU location. Can't remember off the top of my head. But without that existing, you don't have a configuration for Windows updates, meaning that, once again, they changed the GUI, but because the GUI is hosed and the backend configuration doesn't work right, the Windows updates is still turned on, everything's still turned on, the system would still get the roll-ups, and it would probably just replace the entire package on the next upgrade. So not really configured. So I'm just going to close out of this, and obviously we know that at this point, not only is the privacy a problem, but the updates are a problem. My guess is if we really dug into Defender, some of the Defender updates I could tell in the registry are set, but for the most part, they all look like just the triggers from the actual slide options in the GUI, meaning that there's nothing really fixed from a privacy standpoint in this operating system, nor is there any configuration whatsoever from a security standpoint. At this point, the only thing that I could see active in this OS that differentiates this OS from the OEM OS is Start as Back. But even the Start as Back configuration, from what I can tell, looks like it's cracked. Meaning that, realistically, if you're going to use this, just buy Start as Back, put it on your Windows 11 system, you'd be in better shape. Okay guys, so let's go now through the actual control panel and take a look at what's installed on this system. So we're going to open up Run, we're going to type in Control, and then we're going to hit Enter. It's going to open up our control panel. We're going to go to Programs, specifically to uninstall program, and see what is actually installed on here. And from here, we could see that we have 7-zip, Start is back, and then the VMware tools that I installed. Let's also jump and see if there's any Windows features that come pre-installed that are different than what we get on Windows 11, but from what I could see, it does not appear that that is the case. Importantly, keep in mind that we also have SMB1 support turned off, which is good news. That means that we haven't reduced the security, at least from what we could tell now. Let's take a look. So we have PowerShell, we have Work Folders Client, we have SMB Direct for file sharing, but all this stuff is just out of the box configuration for Windows 11. There doesn't appear to be anything customized on here in the add remove programs or the add remove Windows components or features. Everything looks like it's the standard out of the box Windows 11 configuration. Next, we're going to open up CMD as admin, as you can see on the screen. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to run a netstat command on the system to see what we're listening for. So to do that, we're going to do netstat -aon. We're going to do a space, a pipe, another space. We're going to do find, do a /I, and then we're going to quote out listening and end out quote and hit enter. Basically what this command does is netstat -aon is the options that we want to pull back. The options are pretty standard. A is all, so show us all the addresses. O is showing us the ownership of the actual port. So that's the PID number information that we see here on the right-hand side. That correlates with O. And then address, or N, is the actual network address. And what that does is it correlates a numeric value for the actual IP address and the listening port itself. Generally speaking, I use this option more than anything else in Windows just because it gives me the ability to see the format that we see here on the screen. So what do we have going on this particular OS? Well, we have 135, which is normal. We have 445, which is normal. We have 139, which is normal. And then again, we have a duplicate under here under IPv6 under listening. So we could tell based off of our connection here, our listening ports, that this all looks relatively normal. Now the problem is that in Windows, since we use dynamic port mapping, dynamic port allocation, it's a double-edged sword, meaning that in the situation of older versions of Windows where things like 135, 445, and 139 were kind of the standard port for the listening port, Microsoft for security has started to do things called dynamic port mapping, allowing random listening ports to listen for the same applications, meaning that in the newer versions of Windows, maybe they reconfigure certain configuration standards to use dynamic ports versus static ports. This helps with security because you can't create an application that is going to use a specific port for remote connection. So it increases the security of the operating system, but the downside is that because port 49664 could be port 49671, the next reboot, it's really difficult to understand specifically what you're looking at here in the list. Now, these ports, 49664 through 70, should be, for the most part, pretty standard on all versions of Windows 11, meaning that they're associated with applications. And the thing about this is in the command prompt, we could run a task list command and figure out each one of these PIDs to figure out what they're allocated to, or you could use the GUI. If we launch the GUI and we take a look at Task Manager, we could see listed under details of Task Manager that we have the PID number. So if we align the actual list here by PID, we're going to see system idle process is 0 and system is 4. These are standard. This is what you're going to see on every machine. Everything else could really be different. If we scroll down through here and continue to go, we'll see various numbers. Now, if we look on the right-hand side here, I still have the background for the command prompt showing. And we could take, like, say, 976, which we already know, I think was port or listening port 135. But at any rate, if we take 976 and we go in here and we take a look, we could find 976. Now you'll see service host. Now the problem with SVC host is that you don't know what's actually running that particular PID number. We could see that it's the network service, but that doesn't really help us much, right? Because right here we have network service. So they're named the same thing. So how will we know what that user is actually running under an SVC host? This is why I don't think the GUI is particularly well configured for you to really troubleshoot these issues with the actual port. Now, again, you'll know what the executable is, and that's great. But if we actually looked at the executable from a service standard, there would be options listed there, and we can't see those options through this particular location. However, if we go back to the actual command prompt, we can enter in a command here for 976, which was 135. We could enter in 976, and we could figure out what is listed under the SVC host. Let's do that. If we enter in the command task list space / SVC space pipe space find space / I space quote 976 quote. At this point, once we execute this command, what it's going to do is it's going to ignore any case sensitivity. Obviously with numbers that's different, but I still use that command for pretty much anything that I'm going to find just because it helps me locate details and data. Now there are other options in here you could use, but generally speaking, under task list and netstat, usually those are the ones that I use the most, is that particular option, this particular option at the end here, to find specific data that I'm looking for. So once I hit the enter key here, what this is going to do is it's going to give me the details of what's listed under the SVC host. So we could see the SVC host listed, we could see the PID number, but then we could see what is actually inside of that particular SVC host. So we could see its RPC EPT mapper, and we could see its RPC capital S lowercase s. The problem is that in Windows, because you could technically synthesize this executable and create another one with the same name in a different location, there's really not a way for us to tell if this is legit or not without running either an antivirus scan or actually searching for the svc host.exe and making sure that the only one that exists is inside of our System32 location. But based on the fact that the rest of this operating system is pretty much standard out of the box, I'm going to just assume that what we're seeing here is pretty much just what it is, right? So we're going to take it at face value because there's nothing else configured in here, so there's no real reason for us to believe that any of this stuff is wrong. However, we're still going to run a Tenable scan against this thing, and that will scan for viruses, so we'll be able to tell right away if there is anything else on this operating system. Let's kick off from the Tenable Nessus server. You can see now that we have two different configurations in here. We baselined a Windows 11 25H2 system. We could see that we have one low and 63 infos. The ICMP date time disclosure, not a big deal. I mean, realistically, in a full configuration of Tenable Nessus, if I was doing this scan for actual production-based machines, I would probably check this off as not an issue and then just hide it. But for the sake of these videos, I've left all this stuff as the default for the configuration so we could see everything as it exists in a scan. Now, I've already scanned the other system with an antivirus, and I can tell you that there are no viruses on the Paranoid edition of Windows 11. So from a virus perspective, it's clean. However, the configuration side, believe it or not, our base Windows 11 25H2 system is in better shape than our full Paranoid scan, so our Paranoid Windows 11 system, which we could see we have one medium, one low, and 63 infos. So we still have the low and the 63 infos, but we now have a one medium listed in here as well because there are configurations that have taken place on the operating system to actually reduce the security and privacy of the operating system versus increase the privacy and security of the operating system. So it's actually worse on our Paranoid edition than it is as an out-of-the-box configuration on Windows 11 25H2. When we drill into the medium, we can actually take a look. So we can see the medium says it's an SMB signing not required. And under the description, we can see signing is not required on the remote SMB server. An unauthenticated remote attacker can exploit this to conduct a man-in-the-middle attack against the SMB server. Now, out of the box, the actual configuration on 11 says Microsoft Network Server digitally signed communication is set to always, which means that somebody reconfigured this and disabled the communication settings from always to never. Generally, we'll see this in a system that has enabled SMB1. But then there's the question, well, if I was paranoid and I wanted to increase my security and my privacy, why would you disable the signing option for SMB connections? So it's not rare that we see these type of configuration issues on these bootleg machines because a lot of these things I would imagine are probably built by kids that are just interested in learning the desktop. And for those people, I would tell you, knock yourself out. I'll keep testing them. You keep building them. We could eventually get something that's secure. But this particular OS, well, it does give us hope that there are people out there that are security focused and privacy focused for an operating system. Unfortunately, this falls short of actually providing any of those physical options in a baseline configuration operating system. In addition, unfortunately, because they put the TeamOS information on here, I have to assume now that it's probably not a kid, that it's probably an adult or a team of adults that created this. But boy, I'll tell you, I mean, if you're trying to showcase your ability in security and fundamentals of understanding the Windows operating system, putting your name on an operating system that has a broken GUI and then that you don't know that you have to reconfigure the backend to mimic the changes that you make on the GUI is not a good look for you as a company. In addition, having things on here that require me to pay for this operating system when really it's just very minimal configuration differences, the Start is Back application, and a different desktop background seems a little bit of an ask. But then I'm curious what you guys think. Leave a comment down below. Is this an operating system you're interested in? This is one of those OSs that I probably won't publish just because apparently there is a paid wall where they do want you to pay for the OS. And unfortunately, when it comes to those types of things in operating systems that literally have zero configuration on them and also aren't paying for like the application like Start is Back, this is not something I would share. And quite frankly, if you really wanted this OS, just install Start is Back and change your desktop background. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.